We begin with a television exclusive. Whit Shepard was a senior at Deerfield Academy in 1983. His squash coach, math teacher, and dorm parent was a charismatic figure named Peter Hindle. It took him decades to speak out, but Shepard finally told school officials that Hindle sexually abused him. Now Shepard is speaking publicly. He told his story in a first-person account in yesterday's Boston Globe magazine, and I spoke with him earlier this month. And Whit Shepard joins me. Welcome, Whit.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Quite a story in the Boston Globe. So originally, you did not use your name when you made the first letter and all those stories were printed. What made you decide to go ahead and put your name on this story?
Well, I think, Emily, that it's you see so many of these stories where, you know, John Doe and John Doe number 8 and people say anonymous, and I just think there's a certain power and a certain sort of transformational aspect that can happen if somebody puts their name on something like that. So it took me a while to get comfortable with the idea of doing that, and I thought that, frankly, I could do more good by eventually attaching my name to the story than just being another anonymous reporter of abuse.
As you point out in the story, this happened in 1983, which was a long time ago. You were a senior in high school at Deerfield. What took you so long to make the initial overture to Deerfield, which was actually in 2004?
Right. You know, I think what I told myself, as many people who have the same experience do, is something along the lines of, it wasn't that bad, or, you know, why not just let bygones be bygones? You know, I just did the best I could to move on with my life, and I did, but it's a sort of thing it's sort of like it's always there. It's not something I would even think about maybe every day, but if I thought about regrets in life or things that had happened that I didn't feel okay about or good about, that would have been at the top of the list. And I think it took me a long time to find the courage to decide to talk to other people about it and to make it known.
Were you surprised by the school's reaction at the time? Because you wrote a letter or an email, I'm not sure what it was, to the then headmaster at Deerfield. You didn't use Peter Hindle's name, which has since been, so he is the teacher who molested you, but you said it happened, and you described what happened. But they kind of dismissed it. I mean, were you surprised that they didn't come back at you and say, well, tell us who it is, tell us more?
You know, I actually really wasn't. I think at the time, I think part of what happens when things like this go on is that there's a certain feeling of a certain lack of deservability, or sort of a negative entitlement almost. And I was actually at the time just sort of glad that they responded at all. And it wasn't until really years later that when I got the much more positive and proactive response from Margarita Curtis and the Board of Trustees, the current head of school, that I really looked back and thought, wow, yeah, that was really a half measure at best. I mean, I was glad to be acknowledged. It's only really now that I look back and think, wow, I am surprised that they didn't ask me more. It was sort of yeah, just dealt with it a tiny little bit. I got it off my chest. I was heard to some extent. I got a letter back. It was nice. It was supportive, but there was no contact or communication after that.
Take us back to when you were high school seniors. Fall, you were 17 in 1983 in the fall. You turned 18 in the winter season. But what was it about Peter Hindle? You met him your freshman year. You and the other kids all described him as charismatic, fun. I mean, there's a picture of you. He's got a pipe in his mouth. He's got, I think, a beer bottle on his lap. I mean, what was it about him?
You know, I think like a lot of teachers that we had, you know, one of the positives of independent schools and certainly boarding schools is the greater contact between teachers and students in a positive sense. You know, they're your teachers often, they're your coaches, and then oftentimes they're also your dorm parent. They really are serving sort of in loco parentis, and they're responsible for your welfare. And he just had a way of sort of he was very ingratiating. He would make eye contact with you, ask you how your day went, and he didn't just do that to a few kids. He sort of did that with everybody. I didn't feel specially favored by any means by him. He just had a way about him. He connected with people in his own way, usually through humor, sort of levity. And I think that's sort of how he originally connected with people. And any darker side just was not out there for anybody to really glean.
Well, the word was out on him, as you're right, that he led a rather loose floor. So you wanted to be on his dorm floor last year anyway, because kids rarely got written up. You had to do something really egregious to get written up.
It had to be absolutely blatant. I mean, in the student culture at Deerfield, it was a known fact that if you were a senior and you wanted to party and do what you wanted to do and not get in trouble, you really wanted to get a room on Barton 3. And there were only about 10 or 11 rooms on the floor. So I think pretty much half the senior class, certainly those of us who were into busting, sort of breaking the rules, were more than happy to want to be there.
Did he have an apartment, or was it a room like yours? It was an apartment.
Well, yeah, it wasn't much more than a dorm room. We would go in there as a group after study hall sometimes to watch television or have what we called feeds, which were sort of snack time. Whenever somebody would have a birthday, we'd go in there and celebrate someone's birthday. But as I remember it, Spartan is sort of an understatement. He had like a little alcove, I think, he had a desk, a couch, and a little sleeping alcove, and that's where he lived for, many, many years as a bachelor.
So how did it start there? So you moved onto this floor, Barton 3, which he was the dorm resident, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
How did it start?
He was my squash coach, so I'd gotten to know him through that. Looking back now, it seems pretty odd to me that he showered with our team. That's pretty creepy by today's standards. But again, I never heard another student back then at that era say, wow, it's really weird that our coach showers with us. After Penn State, Sandusky, and all this, obviously, that's not something people do now. So I knew him through that way. Then I was on his floor, and then sort of out of left field, he started asking me. He started saying that I looked tense, that he thought I could really use a back rub, and would I like a back rub from him? And I had really never had a back rub, I don't think, in my life. I didn't quite get it, didn't quite know. I really did not feel like it was a sexual overture. I wasn't savvy enough at the time.
Although, did he ask you to take your shirt off? Or?
Well, he didn't. He certainly didn't. When he asked me in his office or whatever, his apartment, with other kids around, if I wanted a back rub. Again, it was the kind of thing where he sort of pestered me about it. Asked me 3, 4, or 5 times. I eventually said, okay, sure. And I literally think I might have said, well, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And I don't remember exactly what he said, but essentially, we'll just, not much, just, lie down on your bed and I'll come in and I'll just rub your back. As far as, asking me to take my shirt off and stuff, I really don't recall specifically the first time he gave me a back rub. For me, the marker is when the probing crossed over into sexual stuff. I remember that pretty well.
And it went on for a while. What did you think was going on?
Well, I think at that point, I think I sort of knew what was going on to the extent that, wow, this is a sexual thing. I don't think at 17 or 18 years old, and not with a wealth of sexual experience under my belt going to an all-boys school, that I really sort of understood the implications of what was going on. I had never identified as anything other than a heterosexual teenager. I was pretty girl crazy, like most boys there were. I knew it was wrong on one hand, but I think unfortunately what happens with abuse too is, in a sense, part of it feels okay. It feels good in a physical sense in some ways, and that can be pretty confusing because there's a discrepancy between how you feel in your head about it and how it feels bodily, I guess.
In hindsight, what are your thoughts about his sexuality?
It's hard to say. I'm not really one to gauge or assess someone else's. My feeling is everybody can be what they are and needs to be who they are. I also don't think it's okay for teachers to be sexual with students, whether it's a heterosexual or a homosexual.
No, but were there women in his life that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Not that I'm aware of. I don't believe he was ever married. There was never any word of that. He had no children. We were his children, and so as had been, 40, 30, at that point, 30 years of students before us. He was a sort of a man's man. I would have never in a million years guessed that his sexual proclivities would have been geared towards boys or men. Yeah.
Since you've reported this, at least one other kid from that genre has come forward, but are you surprised there aren't more? Do you think there are more?
Yeah, I at this point actually two students who they have remained anonymous, and I very much understand the reasons to do that, and I really send out my support to them and any others from afar, because I know what it's like, and I know how important it can be to maintain your anonymity with that. So two others have come forward to say that they were molested.
By Peter Hindle.
By Peter Hindle specifically. I would think in a 44-year career at the school, it would not surprise me if there weren't several other or even dozens of victims, but we'll never know unless they come forward. And part of why I wrote the article for the Globe magazine is that I wanted to essentially raise the bar and set an example for people to really see that it's okay. And in fact, it might even be smart to come forward.
I mean, this guy lived and breathed the school. He was called the Czar. As you point out, he wore this windbreaker all times of the year with this Czar on the background. Yeah. I mean, everybody revered him. There were things named after him at the school, which they have since taken away. But is he going to be prosecuted? He's 78 years old. He still lives nearby to Deerfield, as I recall.
Well, I think he lives in South Dartmouth, probably Mass. So close enough. But I mean, all I know is he's been served with a notice of trespass by the school. So he's no longer welcome on the campus, which I think is a good start. And they have taken his name off of honorariums, a math chair, and one of the squash courts at the school. I don't know what the district attorney will do. I think a lot of it has to do with when things happened, how old people were when it happened. For me, it's simply been somewhat satisfying to. I don't wish him particular ill will, but people like him who do things like that, I do wish that they would either get help or and certainly be exposed for what they are. For me, it was all about sort of lifting up the veil, and saying this is part of what this person really was, and this is what really happened to me.
Well, there's no doubt in the mind of the current administration at that school that you are telling the truth. They spoke to him, I guess, in some form or other, and he said, "Well, it's a matter of interpretation. They are having none of that."
Yeah, it sounds like that. I mean, that's their public posture, and privately as well. And I've been very heartened by the response. Like I can't say enough good things about Margarita Curtis. She treated me very respectfully and kindly right from the beginning. Treated me as making a credible allegation, and has offered me support from the beginning. And I think other people sort of came on board via her example. I think that first contact was so important. And I wrote a really strong letter to her that was just very straight, and it was really just the facts. And it was the second letter I had written to Deerfield, and the second one is the one that stuck.
All right. Whit Shepard, thanks for telling your story.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Emily.
it. Prosecutors say they are currently investigating the abuse allegations. The Boston Globe, meanwhile, contacted Peter Hindle, who told them, "I don't want to comment. I don't believe any of the story, and I never will."